Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Talisha Sutton Kennedy, and I will be leading us in this session today about the repository crisis scorecards. Today, we're going to share a presentation that shares a little bit of information about the repository scorecards, their purpose and background, as well as the project currently being led by Joseph Gum in partnership with Tessera Strategies through ESIB. We'll provide some time to complete the repository crisis scorecards, and then we'll do a breakout room discussion to allow you to share some of the learnings and feedback that you, and even maybe questions that you may have come across as you work through the RCS. And then we'll come back together to do some reporting out and have some general conversation. And we'll close with sharing some ways that you can stay engaged with the project. All right, so as I mentioned, my name is Talisha Sutton Kennedy. Originally, the presentation would have been led by Joseph, but unfortunately, he's not well today. So I'll be giving the presentation today in his place. And I'm here to present on the repository crisis scorecards, an assessment of organizational resiliency to the unexpected. So we start out with a story, imagining a research team preparing to respond to a major flood, but then they log in to access data that they've used for years, and that data is no longer available. There's no backup copy, no mirror, no alternative. And so in that moment, years of work and critical public information suddenly vanish. Situations like this are becoming increasingly common, whether from natural disasters, loss of personnel, loss of funding, or loss of access, really. So when vital data disappear, it's not just researchers who lose access. Communities also lose tools for preparedness, response, and recovery. So today we're asking, how resilient is your repository? And is your repository prepared for the unexpected? That's the central challenge or question that the repository crisis scorecards were created to explore. So across the scientific community, there are hundreds, possibly thousands of data repositories storing important research data. In our work, we found some wonderful initiatives that catalog these repositories. And so they might tell us which repositories exist. There are some databases that do that, and sometimes what kind of data they hold. One thing that was found missing from those sorts of initiatives was answers to questions like, who depends on the data that's stored in each of those repositories, how prepared repositories are to withstand and recover from disruption, and if a single repository were to go offline tomorrow, do we have a way to measure what would be lost, who would be affected, and how that loss will ripple through the broader research ecosystem? So those questions are the motivation behind the repository crisis scorecards, the idea to move us from uncertainty to understanding, and then from understanding to action. The repository crisis scorecards, or the RCS, was created by ESIB's Sustainable Data Management Cluster to address that very gap and some of those questions that I just shared. It was inspired by the Federal Reserve's bank stress tests that used what-if questions and what-if exercises to see how banks will respond under strain. The idea was sort of ideated in February of 2025, and then the first version of the RCS was released in April 2025. The goal of the RCS is to help repositories self-assess their resilience, what's working well, what's at risk, and what needs strengthening. And so the early version of that, of the RCS, is meant to help repositories ask and answer some of those important questions and prepare for a long-term sustainability. Currently, the RCS is built around four crisis scenarios. There is the loss of material. This is when physical assets are lost or fail due to events like wildfires, floods, or even scheduled maintenance that goes wrong. The second crisis scenario is loss of funding. Unfortunately, at times contracts are pulled or grants are revoked, or budgets slashed, those sorts of things. And repositories, still must operate even with fewer resources. The third crisis scenario is loss of functionality. This is when the data is still intact, but inaccessible due to events like cyber attacks, power outages, or network failures. And then the fourth crisis scenario that is included in the RCS is loss of personnel. So sometimes personnel with critical or historic knowledge might be lost due to retirements, job changes, or layoffs. So these are the kind of real world stressors that may be unavoidable, but with planning, their impact can be reduced. And so the RCS guides repositories, administrators or personnel or anyone who works with repository data through some questions to assess their readiness for each scenario and pinpoint areas of vulnerability. The Repository Crisis Scorecards, or RCS, was first launched, as I mentioned, in early 2025 as an Excel-based tool. So if you're the kind of person who likes to dig into formulas and calculations, that original version is still available on Zenodo. But for ease of use, we've recently transitioned the RCS into a multiple choice survey format. This new version can be completed in under 30 minutes, and it serves as a structured reflection tool. The RCS includes two parts, the RRS, which is the Repository Resilience Scorecard. That part includes the series of questions to assess the factors of preparedness for those four identified crisis situations. And then there is a page in there as well that is the Data Impact and Recovery Scorecard. And those questions explore the impacts of data being unavailable or lost and how recovery would take place. The survey can be completed individually or as a team, and participants can choose to remain anonymous if they prefer. Completing the RCS provides immediate value. You'll get a report you can share with your colleagues to start internal discussions. It also helps you identify both strengths and vulnerabilities in your current operations, things that are working well, areas that might need more attention, and the results can also help justify improvements and even support funding proposals by documenting the need for investment and resilience. But the RCS isn't just a form or a checklist. It is really a catalyst for collaboration. Each repository that participates contributes to a bigger picture of how our shared infrastructure performs under stress. Ultimately, the goal isn't just to measure resilience, it's to build it. So the information that is learned through the RCS and through this project will contribute to sharing strategies of resilience among members of the community. And so you may be aware that we're working on a project called Building Resilience of Data Repositories, supported by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation. This project builds on the RCS by doing three main things: improving and expanding the RCS itself, surveying four key groups: repository administrators, technical experts, data users, and citizen archivists, about their experiences with data access disruptions and the strategies they've used to build resilience to those disruptions. And finally, publishing a white paper that summarizes what we've learned and offers actionable recommendations for strengthening repository resilience across the community. But to make this work successful, we need your help. And there are many ways to participate. However, today we're hoping that everyone here will be able to support this project and the data that you rely on by completing the RCS. Every response helps us build the collective understanding we need to strengthen the system together. And so before we move on to that activity, I have, I think, one more slide to share. And again, a closing note here that resilience isn't built alone, it's built through community. And our data repositories are the backbone of our modern science and discovery. They store the knowledge that we rely on to respond to disasters, do our research, and innovate for the future. The repository crisis scorecards are one way to ensure that knowledge endures, to make sure that when the next challenge comes, our data, our systems, and our people are ready. And so thank you in advance for being a part of that work and for caring about data resilience and hoping that together we can make sure the data we depend on today will still be available tomorrow. And I will pause here before we move on to our activity to see if, just to check some time.
Yeah, for those that joined us as well a little bit later, Joseph Gum, who is the chair of the Sustainable Data Management Cluster, was going to be leading today's session. And so he wasn't able to be here because he is not feeling well. Talisha and I have been supporting this project. We know a lot about the history of it and various aspects of it, but we also don't bring some of the expertise that Joseph would bring to this session. However, we know that all of you who are in this room bring a lot of your own personal expertise, and so we still think it's going to be really valuable. And so, as Talisha mentioned, the next plan is for us to take a little bit of time going through the RCS that she was sharing earlier. Talisha is going to add links to the RCS into the chat. So this is going to basically be a little bit of a co-working activity. If folks run into any questions as they're going through it, they can post some, their questions into the chat. As I mentioned, Talisha and I may or may not be able to answer that question, but we will let you know. As Talisha mentioned as well, there are stipends for completing the RCS. And so once you're done, there's going to be a link out to a feedback form, which is also linked in the chat, where you can go to provide a little bit of feedback on the RCS as well to receive that. But we will have time in today's session. We're going to give everyone about 20 to 30 minutes to work on the RCS and work through it for a repository that you are associated with. And then after that time, we're going to come back, get into breakout rooms, and we'll have some discussion and conversation about your experience taking it, how it can be improved, what you learned from it, all the things. So with that, I'm going to stop talking. Talisha, I guess if you could just add that link once again into the chat for the folks to complete the RCS. And was there anything else?
I had a few things on this activity, just some grounding information to provide on that. I think Alicia shared a lot about how much time we're going to have for this activity. We'll spend the next 30 minutes doing this. It is a self-assessment designed to help you reflect on whatever repository that you're familiar with, that you might work with. And I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that you can complete the RCS anonymously. The questions that are included on the second page are about the project audience. How do you identify in one of those 4 categories that I mentioned earlier? Are you a data user, repository administrator, those sorts of things? The subjects that the repository supports, how the data is used, if you're familiar with that, and the country. Anything else you are not required to share. You may share that information if you select to, but otherwise this survey is meant to be, the RCS is meant to be anonymous without any identifiable information. As mentioned, it is a multiple choice Likert style survey. It has the 7 pages for the 7 areas of the repository resilience scorecard. So you'll go through those and then you'll see that final page for the data impact and recovery scorecard. So please select a response that best aligns with your understanding of the repository. There are no right or wrong answers. At the end, you will have a link to allow you to go in and edit and make changes if you feel like maybe you want to talk to someone and update your score. And I think this is the last bit of information that I wanted to make sure you knew before going in. And that is once you complete the DIRS page, the next page you will see will look like this, and this is your repository crisis scorecard report. Please save this page when you get to it. Again, because the survey is anonymous, we do not have your personal information, so we cannot email this report to you. So it's really important that you save this page when you reach it. I recommend using the print save as PDF option in your browser. And you can see here in this sort of screenshot that this report will provide you with an overall weighted score. It'll highlight some strengths and possibly some areas for improvement in the repository and provide a general recommendation here. And so you really want to save this report when you get to this page. After that page, you'll have the option to save as well all of your responses. So you can go back through those on your own or with your colleagues and say, like, to evaluate whether you feel like you answered those. And you'll also have that link here as well to go back and return and edit the survey at any time if you need to. Please press continue until you see the full submit so that you can fully complete that RCS as well. And as Alicia mentioned, we'll spend the next 30 minutes or so working on this. We might check in about 20 minutes, 25, and see how folks are feeling if you are completed. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat and we'll do our best to answer those for you. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your conversation in those breakout rooms. We will have each group report out on some of the highlights from the conversation, and then we will open the floor for additional conversation if we have time for that. We would really appreciate hearing the thoughts and feedback and ideas, anything that has come out, anything you've learned from taking the RCS today. And so let's begin with someone from room 1 who will be reporting out. Please share with us about your conversation.
Yeah, we forgot to pick a reporter, even though you told us to do that. We had a note taker.
You failed the assignment.
Failed the assignment. Okay. So our group, this was super interesting. This is just, all of us found it very interesting. So 2 of the 3 of us work with sort of professional archives, and the third were, established professional archives, and the third is kind of starting on that path. And so it was really interesting how the questions kind of hit us differently. But in spite of being kind of on opposite ends of that process in some ways, we all found the questions interesting as a conceptual exercise. There were a lot of things we sort of hadn't necessarily thought through. So some of us were on the end of government archives, oddly enough, given this conference. And so the question of is there another copy of your data somewhere when we are kind of the archive that people are like, yes, will you please take my data, was interesting. And on the other end of things, like, what is the resiliency of like, I have my 100 gigs of data. What am I going to, how do I keep track of this? How am I going to make copies of it? What, especially if that's not a question you've thought of before. So overall, very, very interesting and very interesting discussion, because one of the people in the group actually went through a unexpected resiliency with a natural disaster. And so that was also very interesting for him to talk through some of what happened when a natural disaster hit. Hopefully I summarized okay, I think, based on our notes.
I think so, yeah.
So thank you, Christine, for sharing about the conversation in room 1. And do we have anyone from room 3, I think it was, that would like to report out from that conversation?
Did y'all also not follow the assignment? Just kidding.
Hey, I have to do this, don't I? Sorry. It happens to me all the time.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay. So, yeah, well, it was interesting. And so, one thing all of us said was none of us knew the answers to some of the questions. And then also some of the questions that didn't seem to really apply. That might be naivete on my part, but for a cloud object store, which is, I was thinking about this repository that I think Christine was also thinking about, and it's in the process of taking a whole bunch of data and moving it into the cloud. And so when something is in the cloud, I assume it's replicated, and that it's replicated in a way that you get certain guarantees of reliability. I don't really know what that guarantee level is, because that's just not something I'm privy to. But I assume that is a number, and it's pretty well known, and it is pretty good. I could be assuming something that's totally wrong, which might go back to I don't know the answer to the question. So anyways, some questions don't know the answer. Some questions may not really apply. Would we take the survey again? All of us said yes. It wasn't very hard, and it seemed to provide a fair degree of utility. The other thing that we came out with was the question kind of reads like a checklist or a design for this is how you implement a really resilient repository. You go down and you do all these things. It would be really nice to know which of those things are really important and which ones, we can skate by with this. It's like I said, you don't really want to be a C student, but you'd like to know what can I get by with, and that might be embedded in there somewhere in a scoring system. That all of those things might not be evenly weighted. Some might be really much more important than others. And we could say which ones are obvious, but since we're doing this as an exercise, maybe some are not so obvious. And so I think that's pretty much what we came up with, Frank and Snehal. Is there anything you want to add?
No, that was good, thanks.
Okay, cool.
Thank you very much for sharing. I really appreciate the comments and the conversation that you all have shared here. Even in the chat, we've learned some things. There are some things that could improve in the RCS right now as it is. And as we mentioned, a part of this project, one of the main goals is to have folks take it so that we can gather that feedback and improve it so that it can be useful in multiple contexts. You mentioned a repository that's cloud-based, for example, and those questions might look a little bit different, right, than questions for a repository that's not. And so that feedback is really helpful because as the RCS continues to grow and improve, one of the goals that Joseph mentioned was creating it in such a way that there are options so it's applicable for the different types of repositories different types of repositories, but we need to collect that information in order to know what questions will be relevant for those different situations. And so that idea and that comment that you shared is really helpful to achieving that goal. One of the things that I also heard, and I'll open it back up for any additional comments or questions that anyone wants to share in a second, is the that interesting dynamic between knowing answers to some of the questions but not others. And that's one of the places where the question that came up earlier, like there's three of us here and we all work together. Some may know things that others don't know. Do you take it individually? Do you take it as a team? I think it's a great exploration to take it individually, see how those scores match up, but also to take it as a team, because that other person might be able to answer one of the questions that, someone else might not. I do want to let you all know that there is on the first page of the RCS a link to some they're called pre-worksheet questions. And those are meant to sort of help you have conversations with your team before going into taking it, so that maybe everyone can't be there at the same time, but you can use that tool to gather information about the repository and then come back and take the RCS. Ideally having gathered the answer to some of those questions that you might not be familiar with. And so with that, are there any things that surprise folks? Anything that anyone would like to share, comment on in our last few minutes here?
The one thing that I was just thinking about a bit is that, like, the software question, for example, like, does the repository rely on software that's difficult to maintain, replace, or redeploy? I think in my place of work, we're kind of going through a bit of a refactoring and migration, and there's like kind of some tension around like different people's interpretations of like easy to maintain. And so like, okay, we don't have to compile anything, but we're writing all of this stuff in Python and maybe with some bash scripts. And now we have like total dependency chaos and security chaos, because we have to reach outwards to so many other repositories for our repository to run. And I don't really have an answer to it, but I think it's just kind of one example of like how things can quickly get subjective or messy depending on how different people, well, not even how different people look at things. It's complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and even you mentioned the inter-repository dependencies, right? Like how do you factor that in as well?
Yeah.
I think we have space for one more comment, and then I'll share my screen and close us out here. If there's anything else that anyone would like to share, feedback, questions, anything about your experience.
Yeah. Maybe a quick comment. I mean, but I was also hoping, I mean, it's good to get this feedback or looking at these questions, but maybe if they, if you look at all those things and you find out, okay, there are certain topics that a lot of, like where more problems with certain topics than in others, then reaching maybe back out to the people who provided like emails in the form to give some more feedback, like here's more resources for how you could address this problem that a lot of people has, or something like that would be nice. So, I mean, we do want to, as James said, improve our scores and getting more feedback. But, if you find like common themes, and then maybe can go back to also like ESEP and others where they can, okay, that's a problem a lot of repositories have. Maybe that's something that should be addressed as a group.
Yeah. I like that idea. Thank you very much. We, as a part of the project, which I'll go ahead and share my screen again. And if I'm sharing the correct screen, you can see a thank you slide. So as a part of the project, we are asking folks to complete the RCS. And as mentioned earlier, stipends are available for that. Even as part of completing it today during this session, if you complete that feedback form, that will allow you to claim your stipend for completing the RCS today. And to that comment that was recently made, as a part of this project, we're also doing focus groups where we're hoping to talk to people who have experienced data crises, and those challenges, and who have made it through and can share mitigation strategies. We're also doing research on resiliency practices and mitigation strategies. And then as a part of the white paper that comes out at the end of the project, we'll be sharing some of those, but also would be really good as things continue to grow, as we continue to learn, as things continue to progress, to constantly being able to look at that data and, report out and share things that supports data repository resilience with folks who have completed the RCS. So thank you for that comment. I really appreciate it. I want to thank everyone for your time participating in the session today. And sharing that thoughtful feedback and reflections on your experience. Again, as I mentioned, those insights are really valuable as we continue to refine and improve the repository crisis scorecards. So last reminder before you go, remember to complete that feedback form if you want to request the stipend for completing RCS as a part of the session today. On the project website, you can find information to keep track, to stay in contact with the project. We really appreciate your engagement and contributions to this work, and we'll hope that you'll stay connected with the project. If you are interested in learning more and being a part of the Sustainable Data Management Cluster, those meetings happen the first Monday of every month at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And those you can find and join through the ESIP website. So thank you again for coming. And that concludes our session. Alicia, did you have anything you wanted to share for the close?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you all so much. As Felicia said, these conversations are continuing through the Sustainable Data Management Cluster meetings. So I added a link if you're interested in signing up for the next one that's going to be happening in February. And then I also shared a link to an interest form. It's also in the notes document that we'll be following up with folks. So we plan to do a white paper after this project's ended that provides a little bit more information about what we found while we were doing all of this. So if you all would like to see that when it comes out, we'll be sharing it through ESIP channels, but that interest form is the best way to make sure you stay kind of connected. And we don't send stuff out a lot there. It's primarily like major things that are happening to keep you updated on all the different aspects of the project. But just wanted to thank you all for your time today. Again, apologies, Joseph wasn't able to attend. He definitely has a lot more expertise in this space than Talisha and I, but we appreciate y'all's patience, us not being able to answer all the details of some of the questions you had. But I'm sure, again, he would love to have any of you participating in those Sustainable Data Management Cluster meetings moving forward. So, thank you all again, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. This is the last session of the day, and so we'll be seeing some of y'all tomorrow.